He was taken in by Christian people. That's another very, very sad story. He was brought up Christian. My sister finished in Auschwitz, which I had notification from the Red Cross. My brother-in-law, he survived. And that Freddy, my nephew, grew up Christian. Soon after the war, we were already married. My wife and I went to see them. But he only spoke Flemish, so I couldn't communicate with him. The people he lived with only spoke Flemish. So my brother-in-law was still alive, so we spoke through my brother-in-law with Freddy. We could communicate. Twice we went there to see them. The very sad part is that Freddy is a stranger to me. We went now, Lily and I, my present Lily, to Belgium 2 years ago to see them, and he meant nothing to me. It's the blood and the flesh for my sister. I couldn't talk to him. He himself is a father now of 2 children, married, a wonderful wife. And when we went there, the children spoke a little bit English, but it was such a failure. I came home from Belgium. I said to Lily, that is my nephew. And it was a tragedy to think he could have gone to America and lived there. And I write letters to him that the children write just in English, Uncle, we are all right, and everything. I sent them presents and so on, but unfortunately, he's strange to me now. The sister of my own, there's the child of my only sister. Yes, and my father, he was sent to Camp de Geurs on the Spanish-German border, the Spanish-Belgian border. Sorry, Spanish-French border, Camp de Geurs, that's where it was. And from there he went to Drancy, and from there I got the exact date when he was sent to Auschwitz. And all the other family, my aunt, my cousin, they all finished off. My grandmother, where, I don't know. My son, who lives in Israel, made inquiries and so on. They only know from the Yad Vashem, you see. And they all perished in concentration camp.
Back in 1939, in Britain, before the war had broken out, were you still receiving letters?
Yes, from my father, which unfortunately, when I moved here, when my wife died, I had a nervous breakdown. I was 35 years, very, very happily married and so on. I couldn't get out of that house quick enough. And there were letters from my father from the Camp de Geurs. I was allowed to send, I was in the army that time, in the English army. I was allowed to send him money, you see? And he thanked me and he blessed me and so on. He hope he'll see me again. Unfortunately, I regret it very much. Somehow the letters got lost.
Until when did you get letters?
Until 42.
And where was your father in 42?
Camp de Geurs.
Ah, yes, you just said.
Yes.
How did life change when the war broke out?
Where? In
England, for you. How did you feel when the war broke out?
When I was still in the army?
Were you in the army the day the war broke out?
No, I was interned. The day war broke out, let me go back again. Lily and her sister worked for Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. And the day war broke out, they were in Bournemouth. And we went with them. They took me everywhere where Lily went. You see, I was still working at the butcher shop, but they went to Bournemouth, said have a week's rest, and then you can go back. The day I read the paper that Ribbentrop signed a pact with the Russians, with Molotov. That I remember like the day I was in Bournemouth that time. And they didn't want to go back to London. So Lily and I decided we want to go back to London, and that's when we parted with the family Wilson, which, let me repeat, were very, very good to us. They wanted us to stay, but we thought we'd rather go to London and see what's going to happen. We went to the committee. At that time was the Woburn House, later became Bloomsbury House. They gave us £1 a week pocket money, and eventually Lily, and then we met my best friends Johnny and Leah. We met them in London, and Lily worked evenings in a household in Tottenham Court Road, cleaning and cooking, and so did Leah. And Johnny and I, we were at home. We had from the committee £1 a week, and we went shopping in Warren Street that time. We didn't have much money. There was a little market. Johnny went on one side, I went on the other side, making notes how much are the tomatoes, how much is the margarine, and so on. We met at the end of the market, we compared, and we bought, as I said, they earned £1 a week for the work, and we had £1 a week from the, which maybe was a lot of money in 1939, you see. And that's how we done. And then I was then we worked as maid and butler in the boarding house, Lily and I. She was the maid, I was the butler. And from there I was interned.
How did that happen? Again, were you
The police
served?
came one day from Ledbroke Grove. It was in Bayswater where we worked. And they told me, we fetch you in about 2 hours time, get everything ready just for overnight. And I was brought to a Ledbroke police station, Ledbroke Road police station. We were there for 2 nights, sitting just on benches. They gave us little food, anything. My wife went there, I could see her, she called, but they didn't let her in. I could see through the windows, she made inquiries. And she couldn't see me, I could see her. She was still working in Bayswater as the maid. And from there I was sent to Kempton Park, that was a racing course. And from there I was sent to Hayden. Prior to that, we worked in an Elstree country club. Lily, I, Leah and Johnny. We went there in a club also as butler, waiters, whatever is. And we had a good time there, only they didn't pay us any wages.
So you were interned, but your wife was not?
No. Lily
Why
wasn't.
did they tell you why you were being interned?
First of all, we went to a tribunal. We were classified as aliens, friendly aliens A, B, C. We had to come to a tribunal, tell our story. We were classified as friendly aliens, category 1. You see? So we thought we were all right. But when Dunkirk happened, England panicked, which is understandable, and they interned people. Johnny, my friend, he went to the Isle of Man, and I went to Hayden. And Lily remained in London until I joined the army. And after 3 months, I was in the intern from June to September.
1940?
No, 39. Let me see, the war broke out 39.
September 39.
September 1940, I apologize. 1940, yes. And then once I was in the army, and wherever my company went, Lily took lodgings.
Did you volunteer to go into the army? How did that
We
go?
were interned, and a Captain Davidson came and talked to us refugees. We got a certain duty towards England. They didn't force us. They invited us. Whether if I wouldn't have, many people went from there to Australia, you see. To be quite frank, whether I would have joined, I think I would. I think I would have joined, because I could see what was going on that time, and it was our duty, really, to do something. And the way that Captain Davidson spoke to us, you see, England gave us refuge and so on. The least we can do to join the army, and we did, the majority did.
What branch of the army did you join?
Pioneers.
What sort of camp was or what sort of...
All right, it was that I'm called Auxiliary Military Pioneer Corps, AMCP it was called that time.
Was this a corps just for foreigners, or...?
Only foreigners, Austrians, Germans, Poles and so on.
And what were you made to do in the army?
Well, at the beginning we were trained. We never had any rifles given. We were stationed in Cirencester, And after Dunkirk, a lot of French legionnaires came over. We didn't know how to shoot. They never trusted us with rifles at that time. Not that England had any rifles. Eventually we had the Enfield 303 from America from the First World War. And they still didn't trust us. We were training with the Home Guard that time. But that time we went from Cirencester to Lydbrook. And the only people who had rifles were the foreign legionnaires, who number one knew how to shoot, and they considered friendlier than us. Although we were Germans and Austrians, but we understand many Germans came over Dunkirk, taking the uniform from English prisoners, from English prisoners or dead, putting on the uniform and posing as refugees or as soldiers. And we had in our camp in Heiden, five people they found who were fifth columnists.
We take a tape break here. Thank you. We're in the Pioneer Corps, and you just told me about the fifth columnists.
Yes.
What exactly can you tell me about them? Who were they?
Well, they were Germans who came over, especially after Dunkirk. As you can imagine, England panicked. They wanted to save their army and so on, the people. They came posing as British soldiers, taking off the uniforms of dead soldiers or prisoners, and posing as English soldiers, and eventually joined. As I said, they were so well organized, they had their cells everywhere, and also hundreds, if not thousands, of German girls came over in domestic, and they had their cells where they got communicate together. And in my camp, in my company, that was in Heiden. In Heiden, that was they found 5 fifth columnists, which we know because the commander told us if they're a bit firm with us, we should understand that they're infiltrating, and they got 5 which were actually Germans and posed as refugees.
What did they do to them?
No idea, they just took them away. I wouldn't say it's a funny part. We had a soldier in Heiden who was, his father was interned, and the son was a soldier in the English army. He was guarding his own father in the camp, yes. He was in the English army. Heiden itself was not bad, but every morning we assembled and listened. That time that was where London got the Blitz. We heard casualties. Sorry, I have to branch off a little bit. It makes me so mad in England, people demonstrating what England has done to Germany, to Dresden. They forgot what they've done to London and to Coventry. And I've seen what they've done to London. Anyway, I just branched off a little bit.
You say you were stationed in Heiden.
Heiden.
Where else were
Near
you?
Liverpool. I was only in Heiden. From the racecourse, Kempton Park, we stayed there a few nights, and then we were straight into Heiden, into the internment camp.
That was into. What about the army? Where were you stationed with the army?
In the English army, we started in Westwardhof, where we were trained, and then we went to Cirencester, and then we went to Lydbrook. And our job, in Cirencester we had mostly the training. Once we moved to Lydbrook, that was in Forest of Dean, beautiful. We were working in a sawmill. Our company at that time was attached to a Scottish company who were lumberjacks. They were up in the forest, chopping off the trees, what good workers they were. And our company's job was, once the tree was felled, to chop off the branches to make just the main thing of the tree. And that was our job for our company. And They drove it down. They built a special sawmill at the end of the forest. They drove down the trees onto the sawmill. From the sawmills, they done sleepers. At that time, there was the big push in Africa against Rommel. Not Montgomery, before Montgomery. No, Montgomery it was, yes. They make the big push, and our company done the sleepers for the railways. And we even had a letter from Montgomery congratulating us how well our company did. But the job that's done by the Scottish lumberjack, how they chop the trees is just unbelievable. And my job was, again coming to the trenches like in the Austrian army, I was doing the sawmill, to pushing the sawdust, all the sawdust into a wheelbarrow. And I remember, I think his name was Dr. Kohler, showed me his hands, he was pushing the wheelbarrow. He said, look at, that time there was still Benno. Look at Benno, the cones I got here. And I used to cure people with my hands. In the end, he ended up in the medical corps. Lots of people then were the Royal Engineers to Intelligence Corps and so on. Yes. But that was our job mainly in the army. And we worked day and night. The sleepers, as they were finished, straight onto the railway station, straight to North Africa.
Were you ever transferred out of the Pioneer Corps?
No. I had 3 times what you call embarkation leave. That means before you are bound to go abroad, you had a certain leave to be with your family. 3 times I said goodbye to my wife, and 3 times it was cancelled. Because my wife was always, wherever I was, until she became pregnant, she was everywhere with me.
So when did you leave the army?
Army was in charge on medical grounds. One day I collapsed in the sawmill, with bleeding, and I had ulcers. And from there they sent me to the medical board in Derby, and they discharged me. I think that was 1943.
Were you, at this time now, 43, 44, even 45, were you aware at all of what was happening to the Jews in Europe?
Oh yes. I knew what happened to my family. Well, one doesn't need more than to know. At that time I did know my father was I knew he was interned. And I knew that from Drancy, he was from Camp de Gers to Drancy from the Vichy government. And from Drancy I knew they were being shipped to Auschwitz. But that time I didn't know that my father was already in Drancy, because I had letters from him from Camp de Gers, you see. I don't know if it's Gers or Gurs really, I'm not quite sure. It's G-U-R-S. And of course we realized, and my wife was then pregnant. She was in London. I tried to phone her from Lüttbruck, couldn't get through. The lines were... So...
Were you aware what happened in Auschwitz
oh, yes.
at that time?
We definitely did. You read the papers. Atrocities itself I've seen when I was in Vienna, and we didn't have to have much information. We learned about the papers, what it was, you see. Not that we had much papers. One Daily Mirror between the whole company. By that time came to Jane, we didn't know who she was. That was a character at that time in the Daily Mirror.
When was your first child born?
Eric was born on the 9th of September 1944.
So you were back home then?
Yes.
Were you working at that time?
Yes, I was that time working in Lions Corner House as a waiter. My wife was evacuated to Cambridge because the bombs were flying like hell. And in Lions Corner House in Coventry Street, I don't know whether you know, it was a very big building. And whenever there was an air raid warning, or sometimes we had to sleep in the cellar there, you see. And there I was already working with my friend Johnny, which I mentioned before. He was also discharged from the army on medical grounds, and we worked together in Lions Corner House.
I don't know whether I asked you before what Johnny's surname was.
It was Strauber, but then he changed it like I changed to Stratton.
You did tell me.
Yes.
Where were you on the day the war was over?
I was working at Lowndes Corner House, the Victory Parade, serving drinks to the American soldiers. They're drinking like hell. I never made so much tips like that in my life. You see, we had only 10 shillings a week wages that time, but we had commission on our turnover, you see. But that time was only 5 shillings, the highest you could spend on food. But the tips were very good, and that was the best tips, better than the Victory Day. We couldn't get home because Piccadilly you couldn't walk. So that night, John and I slept in the cellar of Lowndes Corner House. We couldn't get home.
And where was your wife Lily at that time?
Cambridge.
Still in Cambridge?
Yes. My son was born in Cambridge. Yeah.
After the war was over, when exactly did you find out what had happened to your family?
I knew they were all dispatched from Belgium. Where, I don't know. The real dates, my son who lives in Israel got it from Yad Vashem, the dates, or roughly what happened to them the year, but not the exact dates.
No, what I mean is, when did you personally find out what had happened to them? Which year was that, or when was this?
That was well after the war. Well after the war. I dare say in the late 40s. Yes, in the late 40s. From the Red Cross, the only confirmation from my father that he was in Drancy, that I had from the Red Cross, and from my sister also, but my aunt, my uncle, or my cousin, nothing at all.
Did anybody survive?
No. The only one who survived, as I mentioned before, my aunt who went to Shanghai from Vienna.
What about your uncle in Paris?
Finished. I made inquiries, Seufer. They even did nothing. Such a lovely family.
How did you manage to come to terms with this eventually?
You see, that time I was concerned with my family. I thank God I went through. There's nothing I could do. That time I still got the letters from my father, you see. And I had pictures from my family, which I took in Belgium. Had a special album made of that, and then I started the family. You see, I was concerned of making a living, and Eric was born that time. And we started a new life. We paid 10 shillings every week to the Times Furnishing Company to save up for our furniture. And that's how it went.
Did you ever work as an interpreter in the army?
In Scotland, when I was stationed, not officially interpreter. When we were stationed in Scotland, there was a big consignment of German prisoners of war. So they were desperate of interpreters. They put them in that castle there, and then they asked in our company who speaks German and English. And that's when I started doing it. I never pushed myself to be a sergeant or a major or a corporal or to that and that. All my concern was to be with my wife together. I volunteered for toilet fatigue, what you call fatigue, for night watchmen, only to be free during the day, to be together with my wife.
When was your second son born?
11th of April 1948.
What's his name?
Harry.
What could you tell me about both your sons?
I was very lucky. Very, very lucky. Both were quite good scholars. They gave us a lot of pleasure, I must say. Usually, I even can't see of anything. I know once, Harry, the one who lives in Israel, we were very strict to be home at a certain time, and he went to Maccabi. And he came home later. And I remember like today, they said, Harry, you know you done wrong. He was taller than me. He said, Dad, I done wrong, hit me. I couldn't hit him. But we were very lucky. Both got good professions. He became a pharmacist, Eric an optician. He's got his own business now. I don't know whether I regret, of course I regret that he went to Israel in a way, but it was his life. So I couldn't stop him. That time I met already Lily. She was wonderful to me. She stood by me and she took to my family wonderful. My family took to her. And there again I was very, very lucky. That usually, you know, as I mentioned, when my father got married, how in my own mind I objected it, you see. And my sons never said anything and never did anything. They took Lily and Lily took to them. Lily got a daughter, Jeanette, which is a wonderful girl. I took to her, she took to me. So I must say I'm very lucky in that respect.
What is Lily's surname?
Now, it used to be Nelson. Her husband was in the army, and she was a widow for 13 years. Her husband died. And she was alone with Jeanette, the girl, and she never went out. She never, as she told me, she never had any interest in meeting anybody. And Lily and I, we were a shidduch. We were introduced, and it clicked immediately. Clicked immediately.
When did your wife die?
My wife died on the 15th of March, 1975.
And when did you meet Lily?
A year later. A year later, we met. But 2 years later, that's when I moved in. It was for me, as I said, I had a nervous breakdown. I had my own business that time. I had a cafe restaurant at that time. I sold it immediately. I had 26 years that restaurant. And at the beginning when we started, Lily helped me. She was standing behind the counter, but just over lunchtime. And when business got better, I could take on more staff, and it was a good little business. But I sold it as soon as my wife died. And I took a job then, John Lewis, Brent Cross.
Doing what?
Managing the restaurant. From the very, very first day Brent Cross opened, I worked for John Lewis.
Did anyone ever ask you about your wartime experiences?
No, not in particular. In John Lewis, yes. You see, being with people together and my accent and so on. What did you do? Where did you come from? And so on. So in the way of conversation, many people ask me about experience in Vienna also. How did you get out and so on. Yes. And not only Jewish people. Christian people ask me. See, somehow, there again, I don't want to be big-headed. I was very popular. And I done a good job. I only went there to John Lewis for 3 days part-time because I couldn't see myself working. And after 1 week, the managing director asked me if I would like to start full-time taking over the restaurant.
Did your children ask you about your wartime experiences?
Oh yes, very much. Oh yes, and the grandchildren.
What effect would you say your wartime experiences had on the way you brought up your sons?
The way I brought up my son is, well, I'm a soft-hearted man, not to hate, you know. As I gave you my experience with the one woman in Vienna, out of millions, and the one Hauptmann in the Austrian army, you see, there's good in everywhere, you know. I never wanted them to hate, but we never spoke German at home. We didn't want the children to learn German. My wife and I, we spoke German, but the children didn't want to speak German, we didn't want to teach them, which in a way now I regret, because an additional language won't do any harm, you see. But about my wartime experience, the boys know everything.
What effect would you say your wartime experiences have had on the rest of your own life?
The wartime experience, the loss of my wife, and meeting Lily, live while you can. While you, because The past is gone, as I said. Lily lost her husband early. We can't, the ones we lost, our loved ones, we can't bring back. Life has got to go on. And that's what we're trying, within our means, we try to enjoy life. We see the children, we go out as much, we got our circle of friends, we play bridge and so on. And